Jada Jones, as I'm sure that you all saw on the flyer, and I have been a military librarian for just over 4 years, and also worked for the federal government at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for a few years before that. So a total of just over 7 years with the federal government. So I will talk about all of that. Let's see.
Okay.
So
I'm just gonna pop in to let everyone know that if you have your video on, if you want to turn it off for now, just to save some bandwidth, but we will be taking Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions in between, you can just pop them into chat and we will take note of them. And then, yeah, so thank you, Jada. Sorry, I just want to let everyone know.
And thank you so much, Tina, for having me. And I'm really excited to talk about this and for you all to join. So it's definitely, I would say, not an easy process to get into the federal government in general. The library system is a pretty small group of librarians who kind of move around between different positions. So I'll talk about that. It is a little tricky to get in, so it's good to, have some background and some information. And also, I think just to kind of keep in mind that you have other options. I remember when I was in grad school, this kind of wasn't even on my radar. And you think academic library, maybe law library, medical, public, and that's about it, right? And so when you start to see that there's all these different options and opportunities, and especially if you're someone who likes to travel, maybe you want to live overseas, this is definitely an option to keep in mind for your career. So as you may or may not know, I am currently in Kaiserslautern, Germany. And I kind of work between 2 military bases here. This is one of the largest overseas military communities in the world. So there are 9 military bases between Army, Air Force. There's a NATO base, all kinds of things just in the small, 5-mile radius where I live. And so there's a lot of different moving pieces, I will say, to that. And before that, I was in Okinawa, Japan. So I know Jerica said she grew up there. Obviously, we have lots of military bases in Japan as well. Okinawa is special because it's like an island populated with US military bases. So we'll talk about all that. So just a brief overview so you know that what you're gonna kind of get from me today. So I'm going to talk about my educational and professional background, landing a job with the U.S. military, how that works, what the process is, what you can do to maybe help your chances, all of that. A day in the life of a military librarian. I know that's probably one of the burning questions on most people's minds. I can tell you that it is completely different than any other library. I have worked in a public library. I've even worked in, academic library. When I was in grad school, I held 2 positions there, and obviously at another federal library, and there's nothing like this. So we will talk about that. I'll tell you about some things that are rewarding about the job and some challenges. And then I will kind of open it up for any questions that you have that I can answer for you. Okay, so
you were talking jokingly about me going over when we go to Hawaii. You'll work at Alani and I'll work on the military base. Mm-hmm. This is it. Stuff like this.
So anyone, I know that I have really high ceilings in this old German house, so it's a little echoey. So let me know if you guys have any trouble hearing me or you need me to repeat anything, okay? So let's see, right, well, thank you. So a little bit about my education and professional background. So I have a bachelor's degree in history that I got from the University of North Carolina. I was really interested in history, and I had a professor who was also kind of a mentor to me. It's fantastic. And when we got close to graduation and he started to ask, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. What do you do with a degree in history? I don't think anybody who goes into history knows what that's going to be. And unless you want to, specifically be a professor. And he said, have you thought about being a librarian? You could go and get your master's. And of course, as I'm sure we have all by now discovered, master's to be a librarian, that's crazy, right? Nobody knew that you had to do that. So and then I ended up applying to the program at the same university with his recommendation and got in. And at the time, I thought that I would pursue a career in archives because I had the background in history and because that's really what I was interested in. And so I finished my MLIS, and then shortly after that, I was working as I got a graduate assistantship at the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And during that time, they said, hey, you know, we're offering to pay for people to go and get these master's certificates from George Washington in project management. And also we'll go ahead and pay for your project management PMP certification. So I did that. And I'll tell you why that's important a little bit later when I'm talking about kind of how to get into the jobs. But so while I was in grad school, though, backing up a little bit, I did a summer graduate assistantship at the Smithsonian Institutional Archives. Probably to this day, the most favorite thing that I have done, because it was the history of the Smithsonian itself. And I'm very fascinated with the Smithsonian. So that was really cool. And when I was in grad school, I had 2 part-time jobs, one in the university archives, because remember, that's what I thought I was doing still at that point. And then the other job was in the reference department. So kind of learned the ropes about all of those different inner workings of the academic library. And so shortly after graduation, I saw a posting from she was a librarian, but she was working in an outreach program that was run by the Food and Drug Administration, and was looking for another librarian to help facilitate this outreach program to local area in the DC area high school students. It was a really cool program. What they ended up doing was creating mobile apps, medical apps, for the FDA to choose a winner and determine which app they were going to launch. So that was awesome. We had this really kind of intense application process, and we chose 12 students and we took them to things like different local startups. We took them to the White House when the White House had a technical services department that no longer is there, but they got to meet with that department and do their presentations and all of that. And then we chose a winner, and the FDA actually did develop and launch that app that they chose. And it was an app to locate Narcan for if somebody was overdosing on heroin. So really, really impactful, fantastic program that was fully funded by the FDA. But all that to say is what that taught me was what I actually loved was interacting with people, and not, you know, I thought I'd be in a basement and looking at archives and things like that. And it turns out that wasn't what I wanted, and outreach and service is what I really, really wanted to do. So I ended up being hired on full time at the FDA. And throughout that time, it was about another 2 years that I was there, I started thinking, because I, at this point, still wasn't working in a library, and thought I really wanted to work in a library. I was working part-time at the public library in my town, just to kind of keep my foot in the door. So I started thinking, well, I already work for the federal government. What kind of federal government librarian jobs are there? So I'm on USA Jobs, and these jobs started coming up, and they're overseas, which again, I didn't know existed at the time. So several applications later, and I ended up being hired for the position in Okinawa, where I spent about 2 years at the largest Air Force military base that is overseas currently. And so we had a really, really large library, very big population, not to mention the other several military bases, Marine Corps and Army bases that are on the island that all had access to our services. And then a position opened up where I'm at now. It was a promotion for me, so I applied to that job and got the job, and that is how I am here. So that was a pretty brief summary of my kind of background, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea of kind of how diverse and my experience was. And so it's not necessarily that I focused throughout grad school on I'm going to be a military librarian, or did anything to lean towards that. I will also say that of all of the military librarians that I've met, I've got several friends, no one kind of set out knowing that this is what they wanted to do. So it's not exactly like when you're in grad school and you know, are prepping to be a school librarian or media specialist, where you have to take the extra coursework and do all of that stuff. So it's more like your well-rounded experience is what is sought in these kinds of positions. So the little long-winded approach to my background, but anyone have any questions on that before I move forward? Okay, great. Sorry, there we go. All right, so let's talk about landing a job. So as you know, so this is the USA Jobs website. There you just go to usajobs.gov, My suggestion for this is apply often and apply to a lot of the jobs. There are some keys to USA jobs and to landing, or at least finding yourself on the list to be interviewed. And so there are, if you go onto the USA job site, they have a lot of resources right there that actually will help you to craft a resume. It's definitely not going to look like your traditional resume that you are used to using or seeing for any regular civilian job. So you definitely want to look at all of those resources and follow exactly what they're saying to do, because it's a really kind of convoluted process where the first step is all computer-based. So if your resume isn't exactly what the computer was programmed to pick up, then you're not going to make it through the next round, right? So we definitely want to look at those resources as much as possible. It's also really helpful to try to reach out. So if you all are not a member of some of the Facebook groups, such as like the ALA think tank, or any of the other SLA, those kinds of things that have a Facebook, because people will post these jobs when they go up and say, hey, you know, my position, I'm leaving. So this position just posted on USA Jobs. Let me know if you have any questions. And it is really, really useful to reach out to the person who actually made that post, because they know all the details of the job, and you know, it's possible that maybe they like you, they give you a tip or something like that. So connections are important, as in any looking for any job, right? Fun little story about landing the first job in Okinawa. It's exactly how I said. So someone had posted the job in one of the Facebook groups. She said, you know, this great opportunity, it opened up, it's posted on USA Jobs. Let me know if you have any questions. I reached out to her. She ended up being the librarian of the Army, like the whole top lady. And she then, since then, has gotten promoted, and now she is the entire DoD librarian over all of the services, all of the branches for librarians. So I reached out to her, we chatted, I sent her my resume. She, you know, we kind of connected a little. She really liked me. So when it came time to, you know, they were choosing who they were going to interview, and there were 5 people. And so turns out the woman who became my boss was good friends with this woman, right, who I had spoken to. So not that that I got an extra push or anything, but she may have put in a good word for me, and that definitely helps, right? So you want to try to make connections as much as you possibly can. Okay. So a couple things that I wanted to mention when we're talking about landing a job. There are overseas jobs for the military librarians, and there are stateside jobs. So almost every military base in the States, at least the bigger ones, have a library, and they generally have at least one GS federal position. The rest of the positions are usually like library technicians that do not require a lot of experience or education in the field, but the librarian jobs, there's usually at least one in every base, right? So sometimes it's easier if you do have a goal to eventually move overseas and live over there. It's easier to get in and on one of the stateside jobs, and then once you're already in the system, it's much, much easier to move around. So keep that in mind. If, you know, if this is something you're really wanting to pursue and the job opens up in Kansas and you're thinking, I don't really want to live in Kansas, but maybe you apply for that job and, you know, do that for 2 years until the job in, you know, Japan comes up and you want to apply for that one. Okay. So another thing that I did want to note is there are 2 different types of jobs within the federal system. One is GS, which you've probably heard of, and the other one is called NAF. And NAF is non-appropriated funding, which only means that the funds come from somewhere else other than from the big federal budget. The big key difference between these 2 types of jobs is that the GS jobs overseas carry a 5-year overseas limit. So that means no matter where you go, say you took the job, you know, in Okinawa and you were there for 2 years, and then you wanted to go to Germany, you've only got 3 years left, and then your tour is over and you were sent back to the States. There are no exceptions to this. So what people do a lot is they'll take the GS job for about 3 years, you know, 4 years, whatever, and then they'll look for a NAF librarian job. These are in the overseas facilities as well. And then they'll work that one for a few years, maybe take the next GS job, and they kind of switch back and forth. So this is something a lot of the librarians do, just as a side note, if staying overseas and being overseas is something that you wanted to do. The other thing that I think is a misconception that I usually get from friends and family is that Oh, that I'm stationed, right? That I have been told to go here and be stationed in Germany. And that's actually not true. So every place that you go, you have to apply for the job just like any other job, and you have to get the job, right? So both jobs that I had, this is the way that it worked. And for my next job, I will have to apply as well, whether it's back in the States or it's a NAF job overseas. So that is kind of a summary of how to land the job. And I think I wrote down be flexible in my notes. And I think that that was just about, you know, considering taking a job that's maybe not in your location so that you can get into the system and work into the next position that is in your ideal location. So Tina, did you have something for me?
No, I'm sorry. I think I got some audio issues and I just want to make sure everyone else can hear properly.
Everyone good? Anyone having trouble hearing?
Okay, maybe it's on my end.
Coming through fine over here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I had a question.
Sorry. Thank you.
Hello?
Go ahead, Pauline.
Yes. Do you think that there's more opportunity if you start at a stateside base and then move overseas?
So I would say, and this is just a generalization because people have obviously come from outside of the system and gotten overseas jobs, but for the most part, yes. The reason for that is because the overseas jobs have, they're called preferences, and the jobs are given first to people who are military spouses, who are, you know, living here, stationed here with their military active duty spouse. And then the second preference is military family members. So say if there's an active duty member who has like an 18-year-old or 20 whatever year old, you know, child, they get preference over just an outside applicant. So that can make it much, much harder to even be able to get into the system overseas. Definitely. So I would say most of the military librarians I know did start stateside.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Irene asked, are there any remote positions for military librarians? So yes, actually, generally in the States though, when you come overseas, they kind of expect us to be hands on deck and in the building, right? But former supervisor of mine recently took a job with the Army where she's doing scientific research, I think, for one of the military schools, like the military universities, and she works completely remote, 100%. But again, she does have to be stateside, and for those kinds of positions, they do require you to occasionally come in for a conference or a meeting or something like that. So, and because all of the equipment that you're given, computers and things like that, are you have to be on a VPN and all of these things, it would not be possible to live outside of the States and still do those remote type of jobs. So, okay. All right, so let's see. All right, so the question on everyone's mind, of course, is going to be day to day. What does a day in the life look like for a military librarian, right? And in short, there is no answer to this. There really isn't. It changes day to day, but I can tell you about kind of maybe an average day at my job, right? So we go in and then you have to, so I'm the supervisor, I'm the director of one facility, and for a while I was the acting director of both facilities. So I have about 26 people underneath me. Something that's really interesting about the overseas locations is that the library technicians are generally local national positions. So the majority of our staff are Germans. So that can be a little bit tricky because although they do have to have an English proficiency, that is up for debate, I would say, the level of English proficiency and some of the staff sometimes that get hired. Also, they generally will come in without any library experience at all and will have to be completely trained, and you know, they don't have library systems that operate the way that US library systems operate, so it's all brand new. So that's definitely one part of the job, is supervising the local national staff, which comes with its own set of regulations because we are regulated by the German government on workplace practices, right? So the German staff will have different employment rules than the American staff, and we have to know both of them and work within both of them. Just as an example, they get a lot more time off than we do per year. So we have to honor that. And when the beginning of the pandemic happened, the German government said that all German federal employees would not be working anymore. They would go home, not work. They were furloughed and they were paid. Well, the American staff still had to work. So we had to try to figure out how to operate with less than half of our staff, and, staff that's like, well, why didn't we get to go on furlough, that kind of stuff. So that's interesting. But so back to a day in the life. Sorry, we do have, it operates very similar to a public library in the sense that, of course, there's a circulation desk. We do all of our own in-house cataloging, which is really interesting because I know at most public library systems, there is maybe a main branch where they do the cataloging and you get the books and they're already ready to go on the shelf. Every military library does their own in-house cataloging. That can be really, you can be really creative because you can be in charge of how you want to catalog the items and things like that. So that's interesting. But then it can also be a challenge because there's no kind of standard rules. And so as the librarians rotate out every 3 to 5 years, the new one comes in and wants to do something different. And then you have to kind of re-catalog all of the items. So we have regular hours. We open to the public, customers come in, we do a weekly story time. Don't mind my cat back there, if you can see him. So we do a weekly story time. We are very, very program heavy because in the military system, the libraries are considered to be quality of life programs. So you've got your mission essential, your education, and then your quality of life. Quality of life is really, really important, especially on the bigger military bases. So we have a lot more requirements as far as programming that we should offer. So we offer regular youth programs, teen programs, in addition to the story time and kind of baby time programs, and a lot of adult programs. We do things like Zoom-led book club meetings with the authors. So we've had Lisa C about 4 times, I think. Sometimes we do get pretty famous authors to do a Zoom chat with us. It is beneficial to be at a military library because usually people are willing to participate and help and join in if you work for the military. So that's helpful. We have to do a lot of things that are not traditionally library. So this is where it gets interesting. We have to do a lot of military-based things, the same things that the active duty members do. So for example, there is the award cycles. So every quarter, people are put in for different types of awards within the military. The civilian side of it, we do that as well. So we have to, I took a really extensive bullet writing awards writing class. And so if I wanted to put one of my staff members up for an award, it has to be in this specific military format. We go in and they're decorated just like an active duty member, and they're given a coin by the commander and all of the things that you see in movies that they do for the military. We do the same things for the civilians. We have to do a lot of pivoting and flexibility when it comes to mission real world activities that they call it. So to me, that definitely is the most interesting and also the most non-traditional part of the job, is that we first and foremost are mission first when it comes to any sort of military operation or mission. So no matter what happens, we would immediately have to stop all services and then move all of our staff to support the mission. So the other thing that we do is that we support the entire base. So for example, they will do something like a base-wide back to school event, and my staff will then have to go and work the event, even though it's not library related at all. So we do lots and lots of things like that, particularly when it comes to back to school, different partnerships with like the on-base fire department and police department, where we will go out and help them. And then they may come in and do a story time with us and things like that. We have to provide the Air Force professional reading list, both in person, physical copies, and on all of, on Libby and Hoopla and all of our online resources as well. So we need to stay kind of current and up to date on what those lists are. And of course, we need to follow military etiquette as well, just as much as the active duty service members do. And so you need to know ranks, you need to know what to call people, sir, sergeant, tech sergeant, whatever it is. So there's a lot of studying about Air Force traditions and customs and courtesies, ranks and things like that before you can even get to the point of doing librarian work, right? So all that to say, it's just very, very different than any traditional library that you may have thought about working in or even have worked in before, but rewarding in so many ways as well. So I'm going to talk about that now. Let me have a quick look at the chat. Okay, we answered the remote positions.
And Jada, we're also keeping track of the questions.
Okay.
If it's at all distracting to you, we can go over all of them that we're
Just
keeping
save
track
that
of.
to the end. Okay.
Yeah,
that'd be
thank you.
awesome. Okay, so rewards and challenges. So you can see here that I have the lovely red tape. I'm sure that you can all imagine that in any federal position, particularly with the US military, there is an enormous amount of red tape. So I know that in academic libraries, even public libraries, there is a certain level of red tape there as well. It's just kind of a bit more convoluted when it comes to the military, because again, we're mission focused. So everything that we do has to go through the same challenges as the military would go through, even if it doesn't apply to us. So just as an example here, there is a rule that any computer equipment that's going to be used on the military network gets approved through this channel, right? And the approval process takes about 6 to 9 months. We are not able to order things like new computers for our patron computer lab unless it gets approval through the site. So what we generally end up doing is going through the entire approval for them to come back and say, oh, you don't need this approval because it's not going to be used on the military system. But we still have to do it, and we still have to go through the process, right? This happens all the time. My favorite red tape challenge is, it's called an 889, and this is a form that we have to use in order to be able to use any vendor or company. So let's say Amazon. Well, the problem is that the company has to sign this form agreeing to do business with the US military, and they also have to not tax us. So we're, as a government organization, we can't be taxed. So they sign this form and say, yes, we agree. And once that form is filed, we can use that vendor forever or until the 889 expires. The problem is, imagine getting a hold of someone who is in an authority position to be able to sign this form when you just want to order a couple of books for your next program, right? So it definitely gets very, very challenging for anything as far as ordering and the collection, where we are able to get materials from the collection or for the collection and things like that. So I did pretty recently start a library of things, and that was kind of a mess because it was like, oh, I need to buy this thing. And they were like, oh, we've never ordered, video game systems before for anyone in the military. We don't even know what to do with that. We don't know what kind of approvals you need. I'm like, I know, but we're the library. It's different. So took me about a year, but I finally did get approval to have video game systems approved in the library. So that was pretty cool. Rewards, though, it's very, very rewarding to, especially particularly overseas, to be kind of a beacon for the military families who are stationed over here. In some of the places, the more remote places like Okinawa, where there is nothing that you can get to other than on Okinawa, it's definitely important for us to provide services that maybe you wouldn't think of necessarily in a library. So like, for example, the Library of Things, I do try to do adult programs that would maybe step outside of the realm of a regular, normal public library adult program. For example, I used to hold, pre-COVID, of course, public speaking workshop. So the active duty members would come in and we would practice our public speaking and help them advance that way. So it is really, really rewarding to see the joy and happiness that the family members particularly have from having the library services available there. And especially during COVID, because we did switch to a virtual only model, and we were pretty much the only work life or quality of life facility that was still offering services during that time. And even though it was online and virtual, everyone was very, very thankful that we had something, that the kids could do that was outside of their normal, attending school online and all of that kind of stuff. So we also have pretty free reign on ordering materials, which is great. If you've all, I'm sure, been following the whole censorship issue that's been going around in libraries across the country lately, we don't have that issue at all. I have ordered things that would, have been challenged in other locations. No problem with that, or with highlighting materials. Something that was pretty cool one of your fellow members who is a staff member at my facility did facilitated a drag story time. And I know that in the States, that's usually a really, really big deal, and a big, a lot of libraries will say, oh no, we can't do that. And those that do, it's a whole big thing that they have to do. And we didn't have to get approval from anyone. He asked me, I said, absolutely. And we did it. So that's something to me that as a librarian is a challenge that throughout your entire career, you will probably have, right? What we can carry, what programs we can do within the limitations of the location that we're at and things like that. And I would say that that's just a limitation we don't have. There is no library professional above me. So my supervisor is a lieutenant in the Air Force. And so that has its pluses and minuses, but to me, the biggest thing of that is that he knows that he's not the expert on this and that I am. So if I say we want to order these materials, then we order these materials and no one gives you any pushback. So that's really nice, really, really rewarding thing to be able to kind of plan your library in the way that you want to, and that you are able to provide all of the materials and all of the services to the entire community without those limitations that I know we have at some of the public libraries in the States. So that is really nice. Challenges, one more challenge to note is, for me, is kind of the limit, right? So that no matter what, you are limited in your time being overseas if you were to be interested in an overseas position. So it can make it a little bit challenging to plan, right? And you feel like, okay, now I'm settled, and then it's been 3 years and now you have to move somewhere else. So that's just something I have found as a personal challenge. Trying to plan a future career when you know that this job is, definitely going to come to an end at some point. And I think that the same can be said about everything that you do at the library. So, you put in place all of these programs and all of, library of things or whatever it is that you do. And it's really great and you're very proud of it. And now you have to leave and know that somebody else is going to come in who will then have free reign to do whatever they want. So it's been a bit challenging leaving the position. And when my library in Okinawa, I still follow their Facebook and I still see, like, what are you guys doing over there? Oh, are you still doing that program I started? So I would say equally rewarding and challenging for that. So advice here. So I have on this slide, diversify your experience. So remember earlier when I was talking about how I got the project management certification and worked at the Smithsonian, the FDA, and all of this, what I found and what I have found in my military career is that having that broad range of different experience is probably my best experience, right? As far as the hiring managers go, because it is more useful or more beneficial for a military librarian to have resiliency, to be flexible, to have had a broad range of experience than someone who, just had a really excellent career so far in academic librarianship or something like that. So trying to find something that is maybe outside of what the traditional librarianship background looks like. So whether that's an internship or a graduate assistantship, a part-time job while you're in grad school, volunteering at something that, a prison library, something that is just really non-traditional, I think bodes really, really well for military librarianship. And I have been the hiring manager for multiple positions. These are definitely the kinds of things we look for on people's resumes. So I have a staff member who worked in environmental, I'm gonna mess this up, but environmental equity, I wanna say. And to me, that was a really, really great experience that I felt like paired well with what we're doing here at the military libraries. And I know that her position would have required a great deal of resiliency and flexibility and things like that. And so she seemed like a really great candidate to me, and turns out she worked out really well. So that's great. As far as USA jobs go, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you can set up an alert. So you can do it either by location or by agency. And so usually when I was, still looking, I would set up an alert for any jobs that had librarian, and then that the agency was Air Force. And then you can do one of those for Army. There are now Space Force bases that have libraries. There are Navy bases, NATO bases, and Marine Corps bases, all of these. So you can set up individual alerts, or you can just do a general librarian alert, because there aren't that many of them. So you'll get alerted anytime a librarian position is posted within the federal government too. So that's another way to, just stay on top of what is being posted, because sometimes these jobs come out and they have a 3-day turnaround. Like it's only open for 3 days and you have to apply within that time or you've missed it. So I always suggest that to people, to set up that alert and then have your resume kind of ready to go. Of course, next here I have apply. And I say that because, it really is difficult and it is kind of an uphill battle getting any job within the federal government, let alone something like a librarian, which is so niche and there's just so few of us in the entire system, right? So the more you apply, the better your chances are of landing one of the jobs. And as I kind of mentioned, being within the system gets you a much, much better chance of then getting to choose the next job or the next location that you want. The key being to get into the system to begin with, right? So whether that means taking a stateside job, knowing that you want to eventually go overseas. Patience is really key. It can be very discouraging to apply to some of these jobs and feel that you are completely qualified and the job was written exactly for you and you cannot imagine another person who could possibly have been more qualified for this job for you. You can tell I'm speaking from personal experience, right? So, but you will, find that a lot of times you won't even make what's called the list. And that basically just means that you made it through the computer program and now you get to talk to a person and have an interview. So when you apply for a job on USA Jobs, you'll get notified, congratulations, you made the list. And then the next step is if the hiring manager wants to hire you. So if you are applying and you're finding that you're not even making the list, go back and look through the different resources on USA Jobs, check out your resume, make sure you're doing everything the way that they suggest and you're matching your qualifications specifically to the job announcement. So that means kind of tweaking your resume for every single different job. And then if you're doing all those things right, then it really does require a certain level of patience to be able to continue to apply until one lands. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice. And then I did mention the different, like a stateside military job first, but another thing to consider is a different federal job first. So remember that I worked for the FDA, and even though I wasn't working as a librarian, then I was a current federal employee, which is a different preference to apply for some of these jobs. So you may, when you look on USA Jobs and you're looking at the different qualifications, they'll say who can apply. Every job posted will say this in the top right, it says who can apply. And then it's either open to all US citizens or you have to be a current federal employee. Sometimes, occasionally they'll even be, you have to be a current Air Force employee or something like that. So it is sometimes beneficial to get a job with a different agency to be in the system for a short while before you move into the military librarianship as well. And of course, there's lots and lots of federal library positions. Somebody mentioned NASA. There's also all of the Smithsonians have librarians. Lots of smaller agencies that you wouldn't even think of. They'll usually have 1 or 2 librarians on staff for database management and things like that. I'm pretty sure that every federal agency in the US has at least 1 librarian on staff. So those jobs do come up. There's the Library of Congress, of course, as well. They have tons and tons of librarians working there. So just something to think about to get a foot in the door within the federal system if military librarianship is what you're kind of going for. So let's see. Oh, okay. So I know that was a lot of information in a pretty short time. So I would love to open it up to questions and see what I can answer or clarify more for you all.
I wrote it on the chat, but are there a lot of applicants for each job?
So good question. It really kind of depends on, stop sharing this. Okay. So it kind of depends on the job. Sometimes there was a position that we recently opened. We haven't even completed filling it yet. And it was a GS9 librarian, which is the pretty entry level position. And they had to repost it because we got 0 applicants. 0. And so the second time around when they reposted it, we got 3. And of the 3, 2 were considered by the computer program to be qualified enough to move to the next step. So we had 2 to choose from. So that's why I always say that it's good to continue to apply, because you may apply for one where there were 100 applicants and they were all military spouses and you just had no chance of this job at all. And then the next one you apply to, no one applies. So you just kind of never know, and you just have to throw it out there and apply to all of them, I think.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
I wanted to know, how is it with if you're in another country and you're speaking with the patrons, do you have to learn the language there? Or I know you had mentioned something about that they're supposed to know English, but and you said, but I was wondering, like, do you pick up the language yourself too?
So good question. I think I wasn't clear on that. So our patrons at the overseas are only Americans. So they're active duty military members and their families, GS, US civilians, and US military retirees, because otherwise you can't get access to the base or access to the library. Our staff of Germans do have to speak a level of English to be able to get the job. And so communicating with them is sometimes tricky. They do speak, I would say, some better than others, but at least a basic level. In the community that I am in here in Germany, because there are so many Americans here, and there have been since World War II, this has been one of our main overseas stations for not only NATO, but all of the military branches. And I think that the Germans here are very used to Americans. So there has never been a time where I couldn't speak English and get away with it here. Of course, it's really nice to, take a German language class and try to learn that, but for the most part, you really don't need it. And that was the same for me in Japan as well.
Hi, Jada. My name's Rebecca. I'm one of the assistant director for programming here. So great to have you, by the way. Oh my goodness. The Q&A is so flooded right now with so many people wanting to know literally everything about you, which is excellent. I just thought I'd chime in here with a couple questions that were just from a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Some of these may be a little bit of a repeat, a little bit of an overlap, but I just thought they were pretty interesting. One of them, let's see here, is about being in the library program during the pandemic. And this person is asking, are library programs affected by the current pandemic? I know you kind of answered a little bit, and they're asking about, was there a limit in the capacity in which you're able to do certain programming?
So this is a really good question, and I'm glad it came up, because one thing that is very interesting about working in the overseas military bases is that we are still subjected to the local host guidance. So I don't know how much you all kind of followed, but in Germany, we had pretty much the strictest restrictions in the world, besides maybe Australia and New Zealand, right? So we on base had to follow the same guidelines that Germany, put out there. And so we were closed, we had to close down completely. That happened pretty early on, I think early March of 2020. And then we were closed for about 5 or 6 months. And now the American staff was still working behind closed doors, making sure to keep up with the cataloging and emptying the book drop and things like that, while the German staff was furloughed. Once they were unfurloughed and we were told to go back to work, but only in a curbside capacity. So we had to alternate the amount of staff that could be in the building. And so we worked some days telework, some days in the building, because there were limits. I think it was at one point only 5 people could be in the building together. And then of course that progressively got bigger and bigger. So during this time, we were doing our full spectrum of programming, but only virtually. So we just our Facebook page blew up, and we were just doing all kinds of different things, virtual programs. Anything that could be converted from an in-person program to a virtual program was. And so Storytime was one that was really popular. We had to get, of course, publisher permissions to be able to read their books on Facebook, all of that kind of fun stuff. But for the most part, we just kind of kept doing exactly what we were doing. We just had to pivot in a different way. And actually, we still have some restrictions currently. So right now, you have to be vaccinated to even enter the building. And I know that that's not something that, as far as I know, that stateside libraries are doing at all. We've been wearing masks. We've never not had a mask requirement since March of 2020. So masks are required in all public places, including the library. So again, we have to follow the German guidance on that. And we do limit our programs, and we have to have, social distancing and story time. So we put kind of big X tape on the floor and stuff like that. But we just, work with the conditions as they are and try to keep offering the same services, just in a different way.
Excellent. No, that is really interesting to hear, especially because you know, everyone's just like overseas. How does that even work?
It's tricky.
Yeah, for sure. The next question we have is a little bit, I guess it was brought up because of the drag story time, which is really interesting, by the way. But this person is asking about a little bit more about the conservative nature that kind of is inherent with military culture. And they even brought up that, where are you? That someone had challenged them. Oh yeah. How do you deal with patrons challenging your collection on the base? This person recently had a patron who made an nice comment because of their magazine collection was LGBTQ oriented. So how have you been able to navigate through those types of challenges?
Okay, I might know who asked this question. So it's actually, to me, I think it's a little bit easier to navigate than working in a public library. So we do have a challenge form, just like any other library. And if anyone has an issue with something in the collection, they can submit the form. We did have a gentleman who was very upset about one of the books, which is actually one of the ones that's currently being challenged in most of the stateside libraries, and you know, filled out the form. And then because of the kind of autonomy that we do have, I was able to say, okay, you know, I appreciate your concerns. We do not agree with that, and we feel that this item goes along with our collection development policy and our patron population. The book was very popular, it was circulating, and so we will not be removing it from the catalog. And luckily, the supervisor that I do have is, you know, trusts in my expertise on that matter, and he didn't get involved at all, and basically said, if that's what you think should be the decision, then that's what we'll go with. So that is one thing that like I said, that is really nice. And same thing kind of along the lines with the drag story time. We got some pushback about it. We definitely did. And I think that the conservative nature of the military is accurate. But we also have kind of a big patron base that is excited about the fact that we have these kinds of opportunities, whereas maybe in their public library, wherever they come from in the States, they didn't have those options. So we have more support than pushback, I would say. And so that makes it a little bit easier.
That's really great to hear. And I know a lot of people on this call today were a little curious about that, especially as, like you said, just the difference between the two arenas. And I think that's kind of what's making overseas sound really appealing too.
Right.
The next question that we have here is really interesting. This attendee says, I just started a seminar in library management focused on project management for my MLIS. Have you found your PMP value of your career in general, or specifically in your role as a government librarian? Is pursuing the full certification worth the time and energy?
So I would say absolutely yes, for two reasons. One, I think it ultimately it just gave me an advantage over other candidates. When you think about librarian candidates, at some point we're all pretty much even, right? We've all got an MLIS, we've all got, you know, a few years of experience. And then at that point, what makes you stand out from the rest? So my PMP certification has come up in multiple different interviews and helped to give me kind of a leg up. But as far as using it, I think I use it every single day, every day, particularly within the government system, because you do have to operate as if everything is a big major project. We have to, with all the different approvals that we have to do and the channels that we have to go through and things like that, it really has helped me to be able to organize my thoughts and to be able to, you know, work through these things that in a normal world would be just a regular everyday problem. But in the military community, it's like this big thing, and you have to email this person first and then send it to this person and get this approval and all of these different things. So I think I use it, I would say, definitely every single day.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think that kind of covers a little other questions that we have popping in as well. But this one keeps popping up, and it's really, really interesting. I have oh, Ashley, are you trying to say something? Okay. So the next question I have is from Aaron, and they're asking, are there any trends in librarianship that you think are important for aspiring military librarians in order for us to become more familiar and better candidates? And that kind of dives into some other questions people are having about just how to get a little bit more separation from the pack. Is there any type of recommendations that people in the MLIS can start taking right now, like any courses? I know it's kind of a loaded question here, but I guess a lot of people are just interested in what can I do today to get started?
This is an excellent question, because I think that the trend that the military libraries are going towards is a more digital services trend, especially, and I think that the pandemic highlighted this for a lot of libraries, right? Stateside, public, academic, all of that. But for us in particular, because there was no way that we could not continue to provide services when we are quite literally the only service that a lot of people have. So when that happened, we needed to have, an entire staff of people who could immediately go home, log on their computer, and do something that was providing a service digitally to the patrons. So I would say anything in the area of digital librarianship, digital content management, that kind of stuff. We use a lot of, another point is that we do use a lot of programs or tools that we have to find on our own. They're not built-in systems. The military system was obviously not designed to support the library. So we use things like project management software to manage our own programming and things like that. So any sort of, I think, design, digital services, digital content management, digital content creation, because another thing that we do is a lot of marketing. We as a bigger base have a marketing department, but we do have we have an in-house person who does our marketing, all of our social media, Facebook, all of those things. And they're really, really big. Yes, Samantha, exactly. Social media is huge for the military libraries, because it really is the only way that we can get our information out there to our patrons, to let them know this is what we're doing, this is what services or programs that we have to offer. And I think when you're stateside, there's a lot of different avenues to get that kind of information, but over here, Facebook was a lifesaver when the pandemic first started. And I know there are a lot of, especially with the kids and teens and stuff, they're not really using Facebook anymore. But when you're overseas, that's all that we do is use Facebook. And so I would say absolutely social media management would be a really big sell on your resume if you took a class in that or had some experience in that. I will definitely post the library website, Darlene. And also, Darlene, you asked about, I just glanced at that, living on base or off base. So as civilians, we are not allowed to live on base. Not that you would want to if you have the option to live off base. The only time that the librarians live on base is when they're married to an active duty service member, and that member, is stationed to live on base. One of the benefits that we get overseas is a housing allowance. So you get a really nice housing allowance to be able to choose your house, or your apartment off base, wherever you'd like. And there's some pretty cool places in Germany. So
Excellent. And as we're just about wrapping up, this is, I think, a really cool question just to kind of end on. This person is asking, when do you recommend to start applying for current MLIS students?
So I would suggest applying pretty close to your graduation or after graduation. The reason I say that is because there's a questionnaire on every single USA Jobs job posting, and it will ask you, do you meet these several qualifications? Do you currently have an MLIS? So if you say no, even if you say, hey, I'm graduating next month or whatever it is, you get kicked out automatically anytime you say no to one of those requirements. But if you're applying, let's say today, but you're graduating next week, and you say yes, you know that by the time the job has closed, you will have that degree or whatever that qualification is that they're asking for, then that's fine. But I think a lot of times people do think, let me start applying 6 months before or the semester before. And then I actually did this myself when I was still in grad school and couldn't understand why I had applied to 100 of these jobs and wasn't getting any feedback or making any of the list. And it was because I actually didn't meet the qualifications that were listed on the job posting.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm just going through these lots of questions that just started flooding in about the qualifications and everything. One person in particular is asking about, actually this question got asked a little bit earlier too, about the benefits of being a librarian in terms of what does the packages look like, if you're able to tell us if the pension still works as it would with any other government jobs, things like that.
Just to mention the biggest benefits of being a military librarian overseas is, like I said, the housing allowance. You also get what's called cost of living allowance. So they basically take an estimate of what they think it costs to live in the States, and then versus how much it costs to live here, and then they pay you the difference. So every 2 weeks on the paycheck, it's, you know, a couple $100, whatever it is. And we get things like our utilities are paid for. Pretty much when you are working in one of these jobs overseas, you're not paying much of anything out of your own salary. So that's awesome. No boot camp, Samantha. So we're not treated as active duty service members in the same way that the service members are. We're just regular old civilians.
Thank you so much, Jada. I know there's a time difference, so especially thank you for adjusting and accommodating the Pacific time. We will wrap up now, so thank you. If everyone has extra questions, we also have a survey for the post-program survey that we usually send out. It is here in the chat right now. And if you have extra questions, you can leave them in the comments in the survey, and we could forward them on to Jada. Yeah, so thank you so much, Jada, again, for joining us. It's very, very enlightening to realize so many people are interested in
Yes.
I'm so glad that we started out our spring semester with this topic to gather so much traction.
Thank you for having me. And I just, you know, I want to say, like, again, that I'm really excited for everyone who's interested. I think, you know, it's very important to have recent graduates, people who are coming in right now with the new library trends and things. These are the type of people that we really need, I think, in the federal system. So please apply.
Yes, I'm sure it's very nice to hear all of your insights and reassurance that, you know, even if you apply and don't hear back first, it's still worth it. Thank you.
There's a chance.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And don't forget to fill out the survey. We really, really appreciate your feedback, and it helps us program for future events. And thank you, Jada.
Thank you all so much for coming. Bye.
Bye, everyone.